Elizabeth Banks is a hardcore bitter-end feminist, and she wants you to know it. Even though, as we shall see, it has caused her nothing but grief and embarrassment throughout her career, most recently at the Emmys. The Emmys happened, and while it was a huge feather in the cap for almost all winners, the whole ordeal was of little significance to anyone else, other than it yielding a vital moment at Elizabeth Banks' expense. That Park Place did a write-up on this, saying, at the 2025 Emmy Awards, Banks was tapped to present outstanding directing for a limited or anthology series or movie. Rather than simply introduce the nominees and let the moment speak for itself, she tried to make it into a feminist statement. Banks proudly pointed out that 5 out of the 6 nominees were women, touting it as a big cultural milestone. Cue the punchline: the one man nominated, Philip Barantini, for Adolescence, immediately won. So Banks set the stage for a triumph of female representation, only to have reality instantly deliver the opposite outcome. It was supposed to be a rallying cry for so-called progress. Instead, it was a comedy bit the Emmys couldn't have scripted better. But did you notice when I said earlier, the Emmys was a huge feather in the cap for almost all the winners? Well, the odd one out among those winners would be this very Philip Barantini of Adolescence fame. And that would be because the moment Banks highlighted the great victory for women everywhere, that 5 out of 6 nominees were women. She, however inadvertently it may have been, also painted Barantini as an enemy of all women and all progress everywhere if he were to win, which of course he did, so good job ruining his moment. Now, he probably feels like the Imam Khalif of directors of limited series or movies, having won the award that Elizabeth Banks had set up should go to a woman, in front of all of his woke Hollywood peers, moments before. But this was not the only time Elizabeth Banks screwed up live in a similar manner, and for similar reasons. The write-up continues. This isn't the first time Elizabeth Banks has tried to lecture Hollywood and wound up embarrassing herself. Back in 2017, she called out Steven Spielberg at the Women in Film Crystal plus Lucy Awards, declaring he had never made a movie with a female lead. The crowd clapped, until people remembered The Color Purple, one of Spielberg's most celebrated films, which featured Whoopi Goldberg, Margaret Avery, and Oprah Winfrey as the leads. Banks was immediately fact-checked, by the live audience I might add, and the backlash was so bad she had to apologize. In other words, Elizabeth Banks tried to score points with a gotcha against Spielberg, only to get schooled on cinema history. The article goes on to editorialize how there is enough political virtue signaling in these award shows as is, so no need for the likes of Elizabeth Banks to inject her own on top of what is already there. But this, of course, is what Elizabeth Banks does, and what she stands for as a director. Let us here move beyond award shows, and explore some of Banks' previous work. Elizabeth Banks is of course the woman behind the 2019 Charlie's Angels remake, a remake which was explicitly female-centric in that it had an overt feminist, or more accurately, misandrist tone. The movie was every bit as much anti-male as it was pro-women, so much so that it was the poster child of a movie where skinny little girls with arms like twigs go full Jason Statham on stuntmen literally 3 times their size. Now, you can perhaps get away with Black Widow doing that in the context of a Marvel movie, but clearly, no one bought it in Elizabeth Banks' Charlie's Angels. Just to illustrate the sheer stupidity of the idea that a tiny little girl can overpower big men who are also trained fighters, like the henchmen in this movie can be assumed to be, let's look at a completely unrelated clip from Norwegian TV. Granted, it's 3 decades old by now, but it serves to illustrate just how strong a big man really is. Sometimes, criminals and others operating in the grey area of the law become celebrities due to their part in various national news stories. And one such in my native Norway is Espen Lie, currently a private investigator and podcaster, but back in the day a known torpedo. Torpedo being what we call debt collectors. As a stunt back in the early 90s, he was brought into a satirical talk show and told by one host, "Go and overpower my co-host, who has no idea you're coming." Don't break him, mind you, just do a live demonstration on how you'd let a client you still need to be able to work and earn money that resistance is futile. The co-host who is experiencing being ragdolled and having gravity shifted underneath him is himself a man of, if anything, above average height. All of which is to say, when the teenage girls in Charlie's Angels beat up henchmen the same size as Espen Lee in his prime torpedo days, there comes a point when the audience is no longer able to suspend their disbelief. And chances are, they might not even show up for such a movie in the first place, which was the case in Elizabeth Banks' Charlie's Angels remake. Because you see, it was also the poster child for the kind of movie where everyone involved proudly declared, "This is for the ladies, so men, stay away." And then later wondered where all the men were when they failed to show up at the box office, because the movie bombed big time. Of course, as we pointed out at the time, it wasn't just that the male audience didn't show up. The female audience didn't show up either. On the contrary, more women went to see the contemporary Rambo Last Blood than went to see Charlie's Angels. That's not some inflation bullcrap or anything. Those two movies opened within weeks of each other, and the simple fact of the matter is that a greater number of women bought tickets for Rambo than did for Charlie's Angels, clearly demonstrating that already then there was zero demand for girl bosses among either male or female audiences. Yet to their own detriment, Hollywood kept pushing other girl bosses for years to come, and accumulated, they flushed billions down the drain in so doing, in the process also destroying brands that by rights should have been evergreen, like Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Marvel and Mad Max, to mention some of the more prolific. The ideology championed by, amongst others, Elizabeth Banks destroyed all of these, and landed her a brief stint in director's jail. She eventually got out though, and next directed a non-feminist movie in the guise of Cocaine Bear, but alas, this project was a complete and total mismatch with her sensibilities as a filmmaker, so that kind of didn't work out either. But what clearly hasn't worked out though, either for her or for Hollywood at large, is her particular brand of feminism, or rather misandry. Let's see how many more reminders of that are still to come. For now, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.